Chapter 761. The Emperor's conditions seemed to have improved. The morning court, which had not been held for a long time, reopened today. This was the first time in several months. The officials were in high spirits and did not dare to be negligent. They stood in front of the palace gates before dawn, waiting. The morning court had not been held for a long time. Originally, they thought that there would be a lot of important matters accumulated. They did not know when it would end today. However, in less than an hour, all the officials lined up and walked out of the political hall. The emperor's body might not be able to hold on. Even in the past, it was rare to end a meeting so early. 2 provinces had been hit by floods half a month ago. The losses were not small. The emperor ordered the Ministry of Revenue to allocate silver as soon as possible for disaster relief. He also sent officials from the Imperial Water Surveillance to deal with the floods. This should be the most urgent matter. However, similar disasters were experienced almost every year. There would not be any big mistakes if they were done step by step. After that, it was some trivial matters of the various departments. Since it was the morning court, something had to be said. Otherwise, it would be awkward for everyone to stand there and make it seem like they had no work to do. In addition, he ordered the Ministry of Rights to assist the princess in supervising the construction of the county schools. There was also a small reform of the imperial examinations. It was something that everyone was concerned about. Although he had failed many times, the emperor did not seem to have given up on the suppression of some powerful families. There was still a long distance from the political hall to the yamen of the various departments. The officials gathered in 2s and 3s and discussed the matters of the morning court. Daxing County School. His Majesty is opening the door to the poor again. Didn't they do this a few years ago? In the end, it was still left unsettled. It's difficult. If we want to build more academies for the provinces, we need to hire more teachers, ink, paper, and books. We haven't even counted the academies. All of this requires silver. Can the national treasury take out that much? Who knows? The emperor didn't say that it would be from the national treasury. He only said that the eldest princess would be in charge of this matter. Can the eldest princess take out so much silver? If it was a year or half a year ago, the focus of their debate would be that although the princess was of noble status, she was only a woman. What right did she have to participate in national affairs? However, at this moment, no one dared to say this. The last person who had questioned her had his spine broken by the people of the capital. A great scholar of a generation ended up being disgraced and his reputation destroyed. Countless people would sigh when they thought of it. In this year, the eldest princess's brilliance was too dazzling. She had brought back Tian Fa and helped the Jing kingdom defeat the Qi kingdom. Even now, the Jing kingdom was still deeply intimidated. Later on, she had defeated the envoy of the Qi kingdom and saved the face of the country. Later on, the Women's Union and the Women's Academy had even promoted the national policy of not marrying before the age of 16. They had trained female midwives, which reduced the chances of a woman dying from dystocia by several times. All of these things were enough to convinced. Up until now, they wouldn't be surprised if the eldest princess's shadow appeared in court affairs. But as for whether she could handle this matter well, no one had any expectations in their hearts. After all, even His Majesty had encountered irresistible obstacles in this matter, let alone the eldest princess, a woman. Not to mention other obstacles, just the amount of silver needed was not a small amount. If she couldn't solve this problem, it would be a joke. Perhaps it was because they saw through this that the officials with deep backgrounds didn't show any displeased expression. Supporting the poor was naturally suppressing the influential families. His Majesty's display of this intention showed that he was dissatisfied with them. The big families, who had always been close to the royal family, were not afraid. Their status in the court was guaranteed by the royal family. But for the Cui family and other families, things were not so simple. At least in the current court, they were not so stable. An official said in a low voice, "These years, the court has changed a lot. Is His Majesty still not satisfied?" "Don't worry. Haven't we already experienced such things?" A middle-aged man next to him showed a disdainful smile and said, "This time, there will be no end." Even His Majesty can't do it. Eldest princess, Yeah, the most important thing is where the silver comes from. One person nodded and said, if it's only in the capital, it won't affect the overall situation. But if it covers all the provinces, I'm afraid the national treasury won't be able to afford it. I'd like to see what eldest princess plans to use to fill this bottomless pit. Her Royal Highness's business is doing well, but this time, the shining silver is destined to go down the drain. As soon as one person said this, he was pulled by the arm by the person next to him. The person's gaze was extremely obscure. That person looked back and saw the gloomy face of one of the important figures of the Chui family. His heart immediately thumped and he thought, this is bad. Wasn't mentioning this in front of the Chui family rubbing salt in their wounds? Everyone knew that the Chui family had suffered heavy losses because of the glass incident. The exhibition was not held and the glass they had hoarded was smashed to pieces in front of everyone. According to insiders, this time the Chui family would probably lose millions of taels of silver. In terms of losses, who could compete with the Chui family? Not daring to look at that official Chui again, he looked back at the eldest princess who had just walked out. A strange look appeared in his eyes and he quickly walked forward. It seems that no one is optimistic about you. Li Yi rarely attended court today. He walked beside Emingsu. With his current hearing ability, it was not difficult for him to hear what the people in front of him were talking about. For the eldest princess, it was even less difficult. Just watch. Emingsu looked back at him and said lightly. Li Yi heard this and was stunned. He didn't know whether he should be touched or helpless. This matter had been arranged in front of hundreds of officials. There was no way back. The silver had not been settled yet, but she was actually not anxious at all. She didn't think, what if he was bragging? However, the feeling of being trusted was not bad. Li Yi looked back at her and comforted her, don't worry. If you don't have money, you can cheat some more. What did you say? Emingsu looked back at him. I said if you don't have money, you can earn some more. Li Yi looked at her and said with a smile, you also know that I am very good at making money. This little money is just for sprinkling water. There seemed to be someone waiting in front. When he saw the two coming, he bowed slightly and said, Your Highness. Then he looked at Li Yi and nodded slightly. He also smiled back. The head of the Wang family was an old friend who had friendly cooperation with him. Emingsu looked at him and asked, May I know what's the matter, official Wang? The relationship between the Wang family and the royal family had always been close. Although she was a princess, she would not be too arrogant in front of the head of the Wang family. Your Highness wants to build the county school. It is a good thing for the country and the people. The Wang family is willing to donate 100,000 taels of silver to contribute to this matter. 100,000 taels of silver was not a small amount. When Li Yi gave it to Mississippi Lu, he hesitated for a moment. The Wang family actually took it out so easily. They were indeed the wealthiest family in the Jing kingdom. They were full of confidence. However, thinking of how much they had earned these days, it was normal for them to take out some money to show their love. Emingsu was also stunned when she heard this. Then she said with a smile, I appreciate the Wang family's kindness. However, I have already made arrangements for this matter. There is no need for official Wang to worry. She knew that Li Yi did not want others to interfere in this matter. Moreover, he had just said that the money was just a sprinkle of water to him. Sprinkle of water should mean that it was not worth mentioning, right? The head of the Wang family was only surprised for a moment. Then he smiled and said, In that case, I will leave first. Li Yi turned his head and looked at her in a daze. His face was full of disbelief. Being stared at by him and thinking of the effects of the soup, Emingsu felt that a certain part of her body was a little strange. This feeling was unprecedented. She blushed and asked, Why are you looking at me? Li Yi touched his forehead with one hand and reached out with the other to touch hers. She did not have a fever. Could it be that after drinking too much of that soup, a certain part of her body would grow and her intelligence would decrease? What are you doing? Emingsu swatted his hand away and said angrily. Li Yi had no time to admire the eldest princess's rare angry look. He took off and chased after the head of the Wang family. Official Wang, wait, don't go, Let's discuss what happened just now. Old Wang, stop. Chapter 762. Why are you so? Li Yi bade farewell to the master of the Wang family. When he walked back, he looked at Emingzu and said with disappointment, 200,000 taels of silver, how many academies can be built, how many pens and papers can be bought, and how many teachers can be hired? How can you just reject it like that? In the end, he did not say the word wastrel. After all, she was not Mississippi Lu, and it was not her family that was going to lose. But strictly speaking, this matter was jointly proposed by the two of them. It was the crystallization of their love, and it was their child. As a father, he had the right to fight for more and better benefits for his child. What did you say to Lord Wang just now? Emingzu looked at him and asked in confusion. When the master of the Wang family left just now, his face was full of smiles, and he was obviously in a good mood. She could not think of a reason that could make the person who gave out 100,000 taels of silver so happy. Then she realized another problem. Looking at Li Yi, she asked uncertainly, "You just said 200,000 taels of silver?" The Wang family has already agreed to donate 200,000 taels of silver. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "But don't make this matter known for now. Doesn't His Majesty want the Ministry of Rights to help you? Let them first. Will this work?" Emingzu looked at him and asked with a frown. If this was the method he was talking about, then this matter would probably encounter unimaginable resistance. Of course not. Li Yi looked at her and said, "Do you think others are as stupid as the Wang family? Why should they give us money for nothing? I have already made a list for you. When the time comes, let the officials of the Ministry of Rights visit them one by one. They will definitely not donate money. But you don't have to be angry. This is all in our plan. If you want to hear it, I will tell you now." Emingzu waved her hand and said, "Next time. I have to accompany my mother later. I will leave first." Li Yi had originally planned to tell her all the plans. Hearing this, he was slightly startled and looked at her in surprise. Shouldn't she be eager to know all the plans? When did she become so unmotivated? She could help him once or twice, or even 8 or 10 times, but she couldn't help him forever. This is such an important matter. Can't you show a little bit of enthusiasm? The sound of her footsteps gradually faded away. Li Yi shook his head and stopped thinking about it. He shouted at her back, "The soup I brought for you is in the cafeteria. Don't forget to get it." With that, he walked towards the palace gate. Mingzhu's body trembled and she stopped in her tracks. An unnatural blush appeared on her face. Originally, he wanted to spend a few days in peace in the future and not care about the matters in the court. But sometimes he couldn't stay idle. Fortunately, he was only helping the eldest princess with these things. He just gave her some ideas and the rest was up to her. Li Yi's skill in making soup had improved by leaps and bounds. He would change it every day. Yesterday, he had heard Xiao Huan and Rui say that her chest had been warm recently. Was she sick? She was too embarrassed to tell him these words. Li Yi could only tactfully tell her through Rui that it was normal for a girl to feel this way when she was growing. Xiao Huan was almost 17. In another 2 years, the little servant girl would become the senior servant girl. Of course, making soup was just a hobby for a while. What he liked to do the most was to sit in front of Rui after giving her a massage. He would put his ear on her lower abdomen and the two of them would talk about the private matters between husband and wife, including what name the child should be named and how to educate them. Of course, there was one point that the two of them tacitly agreed on. Whether it was a boy or a girl, they had to be skilled in both the pen and the sword. They didn't have to worry about this because they had a father who was skilled in both the pen and the sword. But if they wanted to learn martial arts, Rui would be reluctant to be too strict with them. If they wanted to succeed, they needed Mississippi Lu. But if she was too strict, it might scare the child. No, he had to think about it carefully. Many officials from the Ministry of Rights visited the officials and nobles in the capital one by one. They hoped that they could contribute to the development of education in the Jing Kingdom. They wanted to donate some money to build more academies so that the children who couldn't afford to study could have a chance to change their fate. The officials from the Ministry of Rights visited them personally. Out of understanding, they couldn't let them return empty-handed. Therefore, they really donated some silver. 100 taels, 200 taels, and 300 taels were considered too much. A minister only donated 50 taels. It was said that a minister-counselor of the Ministry of Rights walked around the Chui family and didn't even drink a cup of tea. It couldn't be said that they were stingy. After all, after the last audit, all the officials more or less donated money to the national treasury. Some even donated their family's wealth. It hadn't been that long. They couldn't ask the officials and nobles to donate money every time the court lacked money. After all, this wasn't a long-term plan. Even if they didn't donate money, they had a valid reason that everyone could understand. Moreover, the emperor supported the poor. It was a terrible idea to ask the people from the Ministry of Rights to go to the rich families or the families of the officials related to them to raise money. Even if they had money, they wouldn't donate it. Her Royal Highness was only a woman after all. They thought she would have some brilliant plan, but according to the current situation, this matter was nothing more than a joke in the end. Even the Ministry of Rights had advised the emperor that they didn't want to participate in this matter anymore. Not only were they unpopular, they couldn't raise money, so it would be futile. They were usually very busy with work and didn't need to waste time on these things. Sing Shichen sat on the stone bench and held a cup of hot tea in his hand. He slowly said, "Although the eldest princess is powerful, she is still a woman. How can she easily solve something that even the emperor can't do?" Now, his treatment here had changed from herbal tea to hot tea. This was a great improvement for him. Although the woman across from him still didn't want to talk to him and it was almost all him talking alone, after the court session, being able to sit here and talk for a while, even if it was just talking to himself, talking about some things in the court or old events, even if he didn't get any response, it was enough to calm his heart. Sing Zumo's eyelashes fluttered and she suddenly said, "Her Royal Highness is an extraordinary woman. Maybe she really has a way." Her tone inevitably had a different meaning. Even if Her Royal Highness had no way, there would be someone who would help her find a way and help her solve all the problems properly and perfectly. There was no doubt about this. Because he was always like that. The sudden voice startled Sing Shichen and he almost choked on the tea in his mouth. He raised his head in disbelief. This was the first time she had taken the initiative to talk to him for so many days. He wiped the corner of his mouth with his sleeve. After coming back to his senses, he hurriedly said, "Yes, yes, Her Royal Highness has created many miracles. Maybe this time, everyone will be impressed. In 3 days, she raised 2,000 taels." Emperor Jing rubbed his eyebrows and looked down. He said, "The Ministry of Rights is quite dissatisfied with this. They think this is too absurd. Mingzu, what do you think?" The slender figure standing below thought for a moment and said, "In that case, there is no need to trouble the Ministry of Rights anymore. Father, rest assured I will think of a way." A curious expression appeared on Emperor Jing's face. Even with the Wang family's 200,000 taels, it is far from enough. What do you think? Tell me. Mingzi looked up at him and said softly, "He didn't say, who?" Emperor Jing was stunned for a moment before he seemed to understand something. He waved his hand and said, "Father knows. You can go now." Seeing Mingzi walk out of the door, Emperor Jing sighed and leaned back in his chair. He sighed and said, "I am old. It seems that I am really old." Changde came out and asked, "Do you want me to bring him here?" "There is no need." Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, "I don't care what method he uses to get so much money. Anyway, I don't have to worry about it. If things are not done well, be careful of his butt." Emperor Jing looked at the sky and said, "It is not early. It is not easy to rest early. Today, go to concubine Yan's place." Changde nodded and a smile appeared on his old face. His Majesty had not rested so early for a long time. If that boy took the initiative, many political affairs would not need His Majesty to worry about. Unfortunately, Changde suddenly looked in the direction of the eldest princess's departure and thought. Chapter 763. There was a heated discussion in the capital these days, and the scope of the discussion was very wide. Even the poor farmers, who usually did not care much about state affairs, often went into the city to inquire about the construction of the academy. They heard that after the academy was built, the children of the poor would be able to study for free. Their children would be 7 years old next year. Would they be able to study in the academy in the future? The farmers, who had eaten the last meal and had to worry about the next, should be most concerned about the problem of food. They had never cared about state affairs, and no matter what the higher-ups did, as long as they could eat their fill and survive in this world, that was the first thing they thought about when they woke up every day. But this time, they had to be concerned. If what the eldest princess was doing was successful, their children would not have to repeat the life of their fathers like them. They could go to the academy to study and be scholars. In the future, if they could become the top scholar and become a high-ranking official, they would bring honor to their ancestors and their families. In their view, scholars were all going to become the top scholar and become a high-ranking official. Although Scholar Wu at the entrance of the village had not become the top scholar, everyone in the village who saw him had to respectfully call him Duke Scholar. In short, no matter what status they had in the past, as long as they studied, everything would be different. This was a joyous occasion. Her Royal Highness had done something good for them again. First, she had summoned her own daughter and allowed her entire family to have a full meal. Now, she had even allowed their sons to study. They did not know how many things the current emperor had done for them, but Her Royal Highness was really speaking up for these poor commoners. Building an academy required money, and Her Royal Highness ran around to raise money for them. However, those rich officials did not seem to be willing, and it seemed that the matter of building an academy could not be carried out. This was the situation that they learned after entering the city. Their money, isn't it all from the wealth of the people? They really want to do things for the commoners. All of them have become misers. An old farmer held onto his walking stick and kept hitting the ground, his face full of resentment. This is an opportunity for the children. They can't be like us. Someone gritted his teeth and said, "They must study, only after studying can they have a future." One of them shook his head and sighed. Sigh. They are all cruel and unscrupulous. The one who truly cares about the poor people is still the Princess Royal Highness. A carriage slowly passed by on the street. After all these days, the old man driving the carriage already understood that the wide road was always blocked by traffic. In order to not waste time, they had to take a long detour and take another clear path. Then he would stop at the entrance of an alley. Sometimes he would stop for a quarter of an hour, and sometimes he would stop for as long as an hour. Fang and the sloppy old man sat on either side of the carriage, thinking about what they had just heard on the street. They lifted the curtain and said to Li Yi, "Young master, these officials are so stingy that they won't even pay this little bit of money." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Don't say that. Other people's money doesn't come from the strong wind, and they don't want to be blown away by the strong wind. It's their freedom to donate or not, and we can't control it. Don't engage in moral coercion." Fang nodded, not fully understanding. Although he didn't know what moral coercion meant, he knew that his silver was picked up from the sand, sent to him by others, and cheated from the Qi kingdom. It seemed that it was not as convenient as the strong wind, and he didn't want to give it to others for free. Li jumped off the carriage and walked into the alley. The sloppy old man habitually threw a milk candy into his mouth and looked in a certain direction. How long is he going to do this? Fang took a candy from the sloppy old man's hand and murmured. The sloppy old man glanced at him, put the remaining milk candy back into his arms, and asked, "Soon what?" Fang glanced at him and said, "Soon means soon." These days, when the son-in-law passed by here, the expression on his face was completely different from before. He had carefully observed him for many days, and could naturally see some subtle emotions. The sloppy old man seemed to understand something and asked, "Say, between your family's young miss and the young lady in here, who do you think he likes more?" Fang looked at him in surprise. He didn't expect this eccentric old man to be so passionate on the inside, to be interested in this kind of thing. "There's no comparison." Fang shook his head and said, "The son-in-law likes the young miss because the young miss is the young miss, and not someone else. He likes Miss Zheng because he likes her." "What do you mean?" The sloppy old man was stunned for a moment, and after pondering for a while, he still didn't understand. Then, as if he had thought of something, he looked at him with some mockery. Are you talking about yourself? Fong glanced at him. What does that have to do with me? Don't think I don't know that you have a lover in the Jade's courtyard. Why didn't you go look for her today? Fong's face suddenly changed, and he said angrily, You followed me. The sloppy old man looked at him disdainfully. Who doesn't know about your trivial matters? Trivial matters? Fong actually wasn't angry anymore. Looking at you, I'm afraid you've never been liked by anyone before, right? This sentence seemed to touch on the sloppy old man's reverse scale, and he immediately glared at Fong. What? Why don't you go to the Wu Kingdom and ask around? When this old man was young, he could be considered elegant, and many women fell in love with him. If it weren't for the fact that I was obsessed with martial arts, so you never married in your life? Fong looked at him with a smile. The sloppy old man didn't speak and narrowed his eyes at him. If it weren't for the fact that he had been cultivating his mind these days, he would have already smacked him with his palm. However, he couldn't casually smack this guy in front of him, so he didn't care about this. The sloppy old man thought for a while, and continued with the previous question, What if your family's second miss is added? Second miss? This question was a bit complicated. Fong was startled, and looked up at the sky, feeling that today's sunlight was a bit dazzling. Li Yi sat at the stone table, took a sip of tea, and asked, The Chui family's ready-made clothing stores are all closed, right? Zheng Zumo looked up at him and nodded slightly. These days, she had also faintly heard some news that the Chui family had lost a lot of money and mortgaged many stores in the capital, including those ready-made clothing stores, which hadn't been opened for a long time. These days, they had also made some adjustments to their strategy. Even if there were more counterfeits, there would be corresponding countermeasures. I heard that the eldest princess encountered some obstacles in building the Silver Academy? Li Yi thought she would ask specifically about the closure of the Chui family's ready-made clothing stores. He didn't know why she suddenly brought it up. He shook his head and said, Those are all appearances. Everything is going according to plan. Zheng Zumo looked at him and asked, Did you plan it? Of course, I didn't expect them to donate much money. The less they donate, the better. They are laughing at the eldest princess now, but they won't be able to laugh in a few days. After Li Yi finished speaking, he saw that she lowered her head and didn't speak. He thought for a moment and suddenly asked, Are you jealous? He, Mrs. Jealous? Xiao Chui stood behind and said with a chuckle. Ever since she saw the two of them rolling on the bed that day, she could say some things in front of the two of them. The two of them were on the bed, one on top of the other. According to common sense, during the time she couldn't see, they should be rolling around. Xiao Chui, shut up. Zheng Zumo looked at Xiao Chui angrily, stood up, and hurried to the studio. Li Yi stood up and gently knocked on Xiao Chui's head. How can you talk about your own miss like that? How impudent! Xiao Chui covered her head, feeling wronged. Chapter 764. When Li Yi pushed the door open again and walked out, he habitually held Xiao Chui's head with his hand. He knew that she had the habit of leaning on the door to eavesdrop. If she suddenly lost her support, it was very likely that she would fall to the ground. The girl was, after all, thin-skinned. After being caught again, she looked at Li Yi with some embarrassment. She blushed and said, Li, are you leaving? I'm leaving. Li Yi patted her head and walked out of the courtyard. Why don't you take your lover back and let her stay in the brothel alone? Do you feel at ease? Next to the carriage, the sloppy old man was chattering. Could it be that you are afraid of your wife, as they say? Fong did not pay attention to the sloppy old man because he was still thinking about the question just now. Although he now boasted that he was a smart person, especially towards the son-in-law, he could see very clearly from the perspective of an outsider. However, the old man's question just now made it difficult for him to answer. Li Yi got on the carriage and said, Let's go to the palace. Fong sniffed and smelled a faint fragrance. He shook his head and waved his whip. The carriage slowly moved. When Li Yi stepped into the imperial garden, Jing Di was playing chess with the proud Lolita. Maybe it was because there was nothing to be busy with political affairs, but the old emperor was more and more leisurely and elegant recently. The proud Lolita no longer played chess with others. She had already understood that the rules of the chess were set by herself. She was invincible in the palace. Even if Li Yi met her, he would have to retreat. They were playing 5 in a row. Li Yi stood by and watched for a while. He couldn't help but sigh. The proud Lolita's thinking was really quick. It seemed that she had a high talent in all kinds of chess. When Jing Di put a black piece in a position that he thought was suitable, the proud Lolita had already put it down. Then she said with a smile, "Father, you lost again. Today, I can go out of the palace to play." Jing Di waved his hand helplessly and said, "Shaoning, you go play first. Father wants to say a few words to the teacher." The arrogant Lolita stood up, winked at Li Yi, and ran away quickly. Emperor Jing pointed to the chessboard in front of him and stretched out his hand. "Let's play." Since he couldn't beat that Sundra Loli, did he think he couldn't beat him? Emperor Jing was still holding a black chess piece. He placed a chess piece in the center of the chessboard and said, "What are you doing here instead of solving the problem of the academy?" Li didn't bother with pleasantries and went straight to the point. "I would like to ask for 2 paintings from your majesty." "My calligraphy?" A surprised expression appeared on Emperor Jing's face. Although he was not considered a master of calligraphy, he was still the ruler of a country. His calligraphy treasures were not inferior to any other masters in terms of value. He would often give them to some meritorious officials, but this was the first time someone had directly asked him for it. Naturally, he didn't think that Li Yi liked his calligraphy. In the entire Jing kingdom, the number of people who could surpass him in calligraphy could be counted on one hand. The first thought that came to his mind was that Li Yi wanted to sell it for money. "If you win against me, I will give it to you." These days, the only thing that could trouble him was the matter of the academy. However, with Mingzhu and Li around, he didn't have to worry about it anymore. He simply played chess to kill time. Compared to the Tsundra Loli, Emperor Jing's level of playing Gamoku was still very high, even though he hadn't been exposed to this form of chess for a long time. With something on his mind, Li Yi naturally couldn't concentrate on playing chess. His level of Gamoku could only be said to be average. Moreover, this was not something that could be achieved by digesting a few chess records. There were also various accidental factors. At this time, he was absent-minded and lost 3 games in a row. When he collected the chess pieces again, Emperor Jing glanced at him and said lightly, "Be more serious. If you can't beat me today, don't even think about the calligraphy." The matter of the academy had almost fermented enough. It was time to move on to the next step of the plan. Li Yi also planned to find the eldest princess after getting his calligraphy. The 2 of them would go out of the palace to do something. Just now, they had already wasted a lot of time. There was no time to play chess with him, especially when he was at a disadvantage after more than half of the chess pieces were gone. He knew that he couldn't go on like this. It was time to show his real skills. So he raised his head and stared at the sky behind Emperor Jing. Emperor Jing looked at the chessboard. Seeing that he didn't move for a long time, he thought that he was thinking. After waiting for a while, seeing that he still hadn't made a move, he raised his head and saw that Li Yi's eyes were staring straight ahead, as if there was something behind him. Emperor Jing looked back and saw that it was empty. He looked at Li Yi and asked doubtfully, "What are you looking at?" "There is a cloud there," Li Yi said. "What about the cloud?" Emperor Jing's voice was even more doubtful. "But yes, what about the cloud? Isn't it just a cloud?" Li Yi shook his head and retracted his gaze. The chess piece in his hand finally fell on a certain position on the chessboard. He looked at Emperor Jing with a smile on his face. "Your Majesty, you have lost." Emperor Jing lowered his head and saw that the white chess pieces on the chessboard had already formed a 5-star alignment. He seemed to think of something and looked back at the sky behind him again. The sky was blue. Where did the cloud come from? He looked back at Li Yi and asked, "Where is the cloud you were talking about?" Li Yi looked at him in surprise and asked doubtfully, "What cloud?" In the end, the old emperor was willing to concede defeat and gave Li Yi what he wanted. He wanted a few more pieces and sold them when he was short of money in the future. However, the old emperor looked at him with a strange expression. He had to follow the original plan and let him write a few words before running away. Through this matter, he discovered another thing. The old emperor's chess skills were bad and he couldn't afford to lose. Li Yi rubbed the proud Lolita's head and said, "Be good. Today, teacher and your royal sister have something to do and can't play with you. Just stay in the palace. No, Yongning has been summoned by Her Highness. There is no one to play with me." The proud Lolita hugged Li Yi's arm and said with a sobbing tone, "I am alone in the palace. It is very lonely." Such a young child actually knew about loneliness. Li Yi couldn't refuse no matter what. He could only nod helplessly and said, "Then follow me." The sobbing tone in the Lolita's voice immediately disappeared. An excited expression appeared on her face. "Then let's go find my royal sister now." Li Yi was a little dazed as she led him to the morning dew hall. He only felt that there was no sincerity left in this world. Women who practiced martial arts usually maintained their figures very well. If it was those who were obsessed with martial arts, there was not a single extra thing on their bodies. It was as if they were made by nature. Of course, those who were born with a certain deficiency could not make up for it through practicing martial arts. The flesh on their bodies could be reduced, but it would never be increased. Even though he knew that she had only been drinking the soup for a few days and that it shouldn't have much effect, Li Yi still faintly had an illusion. His gaze subconsciously looked towards a certain part of the eldest princess's body that was dancing with her sword. Women were always particularly sensitive to certain parts of their bodies and could easily feel other people's gazes. The eldest princess who was dancing with her sword suddenly increased in speed. Li Yi reached out and used his middle and index fingers to clamp a long sword. He smiled and said, "Don't mess around." She didn't have any evil intentions. The speed of the sword was not fast and the direction was perfectly straight. Li Yi felt that the scene of him clamping her sword with his hand must be very cool. Teacher is so amazing. The Tsundra Lolita was always so cooperative. Her eyes flashed with little stars and the look of worship made his vanity a little satisfied. Emingzu put away the long sword and looked at him. She asked, "Where is the thing?" "What thing?" Li Yi was stunned for a moment before he remembered something. He said, "That soup needs to be brewed for a long time. I came out in a hurry today and didn't have time to prepare it. Next time." The Tsundra Lolita shook Li Yi's arm and said in a sweet voice, "Teacher, my royal sister doesn't let me drink the soup you brought for her. Can you bring some for Shanning in the future?" Li Yi pinched her little face and said, "No, this kind of soup is not for children to drink." Mingzhu's face turned slightly red. He really knew the effects of that soup. So, was he disdaining her? She glared at him vaguely. She walked over and opened something he placed on the table. Father's handwriting? She couldn't help but exclaim softly when she saw the 4 big words, Emingzu Academy, written on the paper. Li Yi was having a headache on how to explain to the Tsundra Lolita why that kind of soup could only be drunk by older girls and not younger girls. This was a false proposition because it was more effective for a growing girl than an older girl. But he couldn't really explain it like that. Seeing that she picked up the paper, he took the opportunity to walk over and said, "In the future, regardless of whether it's the capital or the other prefectures, the academies established will be called Emingzu Academy. The meaning is that these academies aim to cultivate brilliant talents like Emingzu for the country." The names of the academies were also very particular. It was very appropriate to use Emingzu as a metaphor for talents. It was easy to understand and meaningful. Of course, the reason why Li Yi gave the academy this name was not because of this. He wanted to let the students studying in these academies know that they could get rid of their poor lives and sit in the bright academy. They could have the opportunity to enter the court and bring honor to their ancestors. They could compete fairly with those powerful peers of the same age. These were all given to them by one person. This person was called Emingzuli. She was the eldest princess of the Jing kingdom. Chapter 765. Emingzu Academy? Emingzu murmured the name. She could not believe that his purpose was as he said. No matter how she looked at it, there seemed to be another meaning behind it. The proud Lolita no longer asked Li Yi why she could not drink her royal sister's soup. She tugged at Li Yi's sleeve and said with a blush, "Sir, build a few Shanning academies too." The Ice Condensation Academy is fine too. After thinking for a while, she felt that she could not forget Yongning. She raised her head again and said, "And Yongning Academy. How about it? It sounds nice too." She felt that although her name was not as nice as her royal sister's, it was much nicer than Qing Yang's. Li Yi touched her head and said, "Okay, I will build another Shining Academy and let you be the dean." "Pinky promise." The proud Lolita immediately smiled. Her eyes formed a crescent shape and she stretched out her little finger. She had learned this action from Yongning. Yongning knew a lot of new things that she did not know. When she talked to her teacher, she could not understand most of the time, so she simply copied him. Li Yi helplessly hooked his little finger with hers. Their thumbs touched, and the proud Lolita said happily, "Pinky promised to hang, it won't change for 100 years." Although she did not know why Pinky promise meant hanging, this action meant that they could not go back on their word. Regardless of whether he hung or not, this was what her teacher had promised her. When she grew older, she would be able to have her own academy. She would be the dean, and she would be a little more powerful than Li Han. This would prevent him from showing off in front of her all day long. Emingzu knew that his words had always been powerful. Since he had promised Shining, there would definitely be a Shining Academy in the future. Perhaps by that time, Shining would have already forgotten about this matter. Seeing that they had completed this childish alliance, Emingzu looked at Li Yi and asked calmly, "The Ministry of Rights has made it clear that they will no longer be involved in this matter. We don't even have anyone we can use now. How are we going to get so much money?" She knew that she had encountered great obstacles in raising the money. Whether it was the imperial court or the common people, they were all discussing this matter. Almost no one thought that she could succeed. Everyone was waiting to see her make a fool of herself. Of course, it would be a lie to say that she didn't care about this. It was only because she trusted Li Yi that she asked this crucial question now. Li Yi looked at her and said mysteriously, "Don't worry, the show has just begun." He put away the things he won from the old emperor and explained, "Change your clothes first. We'll leave immediately. We'll talk later." The proud Lolita brandished her sword at the side. The children of the royal family were not required to be proficient in both literature and martial arts. It was even rarer for women to practice martial arts. Among all the princesses, the only one that Li Yi knew was the eldest princess. With the old maid watching from the side, Li didn't have to worry that she would hurt herself. Emingzu changed her clothes and came out. When the proud Lolita came out, Li Yi told her about the plan in detail. Emingzu looked at him and asked, "From the beginning, you knew that the officials from the Ministry of Rights would hit a wall. You also expected that they would withdraw on their own accord. Is this all part of your plan?" Li Yi nodded. "After all, the Ministry of Rights doesn't belong to us. With them around, we can't do whatever we want. If they leak information, it will have some impact. Moreover, how can we let them take the credit for nothing?" Emingzu sorted out the entire process and connected all the things that he had done in the past few days. She couldn't help but think of the mysterious light she saw in his eyes that day. She looked at him and said seriously, "You're so bad." Li Xian stood behind the two of them and looked at Li Yi with wide eyes. He asked in disbelief, "What did you do to Emingzu?" Li Xian looked at the two of them suspiciously for a long time before suppressing the unrealistic thought in his mind. He said, "I've heard about what happened at the academy. I should be able to take out 100,000 taels of silver to use on the academy in the capital. It should be more than enough. As for the rest, we can slowly think of a way." If it was only the capital city, it wouldn't be a problem. But the problem was that the scale of the project this time was so large that it covered the entire Jing kingdom. Just the initial investment alone would be a terrifying figure. No one knew how much money would be needed in the future. Li Yi waved his hand and said, "Forget it. Your father-in-law has already donated 200,000 taels of silver. You'd better keep the money." Li Xian's crown prince's mansion wasn't poor. Just the business cooperation between the three families could bring him unimaginable profits. But he was also a spendthrift. The national treasury could only provide a portion of the research funds for the entire Academy of Science. He had to pay for the rest himself. It wasn't easy to come up with so much money at one time. Li Xian frowned and looked at him. He said, "Don't try to be brave at this time. You don't know how many people are watching this matter and waiting to see Emingzu make a fool of herself." "Make a fool of yourself?" Li Yi looked at him and said lightly, "They won't be able to laugh soon." As they walked out of the morning dew hall, Li Xian looked at him with a profound gaze. He sighed and said, "When I first met you, why didn't I think you were so bad?" The ruler of the capital, Lu Deyou, sat in the hall. His head moved back and forth as he dozed off. The weather these 2 days had been hot and dry. Although he held an ice pack to his chest, the room was still stuffy. The rising and falling cicadas outside were even more annoying. Wave after wave of tiredness came at him. Thump. The moment his eyes closed, his body fell forward. His head knocked against the edge of the table. Immediately, a large bump appeared. He was completely awake. He quickly pressed the ice pack to his forehead and took a sip of tea. He was no longer sleepy. He lowered his head and began to read the official documents. These few days, Jingdo could not be considered peaceful. The people were very angry. If they were not properly appeased, there would probably be a big mess in the future. The cause of the matter was that the eldest princess wanted to build many academies so that more children from poor families could have books to study. However, the funds to build the academies were not enough. There were obstacles in raising funds, so the matter was temporarily put on hold. In this regard, the people of Jingdo were very angry. After all, this was a major event that was beneficial to the people. All the poor families wanted to send their children to study and fight for a glimmer of hope to bring glory to their ancestors. However, most families even had problems eating, so it was impossible for them to cultivate a scholar. Now that there was such an opportunity, how could they give it up? Lu Deyou could understand their desire. After all, he himself was also born of a poor family. His father had sold everything he had to give him the opportunity to study and take the imperial examination. When he became successful and wanted to be filial, his father, who had worked hard all his life, passed away and did not enjoy even a day of happiness with him. This had always been a regret in his heart. Regarding this matter, in his heart, he was also very supportive of the eldest princess. However, there did not seem to be many people in the court who thought the same as him. When he read the official documents and felt sleepy again, a yamen runner came to report that the eldest princess and the Marquis of Chang, Enchanting, had arrived. County Magistrate Lu's sleepiness was swept away at this moment. He hurriedly stood up, tidied up his official uniform, came to the back hall of the county government, stepped into the room, and cupped one hand in the other before his chest to the two people sitting above. "Greetings to the eldest princess and Marquis Li." Chapter 766. Lord Lu, what's wrong? Li Yi looked at the bump on County Magistrate Lu's forehead and asked in surprise. Of course, Lu Deyou couldn't say that he bumped into it when he was dozing off. He smiled awkwardly and said, "I accidentally bumped into it." If he bumped into it accidentally, there would be no reason to be embarrassed. When Li Yi was in Qing and Prefecture, he heard that Lord Lu and his concubine had a lot of fun in the bedroom. He might have hurt himself by playing some new tricks last night. He looked at him strangely and said, "Although you're having fun, Lord Lu, you have to be careful." Emingsu looked at them and asked, "What are you talking about?" County Magistrate Lu was also puzzled, but he didn't continue on this topic. He raised his head and asked, "What can I do for your Highness and Marquis?" Li was not used to his words. He waved his hand and said, "We're old friends. You don't have to be so polite." County Magistrate Lu. How could he, Lu Deyou, be friends with the emperor's close officials and the princess? County Magistrate Lu was nervous, but he couldn't help but feel happy. Although the eldest princess was a woman, she wielded more authority than any of the princes. She was also an influential figure in the royal court. As for County Marquis Li, he was able to influence the political situation. To a certain extent, it could be said that he was able to rise from an insignificant county magistrate of Anxi to a magistrate of the capital. Li didn't say much to him. He took a sip of tea and asked directly, "How many rich merchants do you know in the capital?" Rich merchants? Although he didn't know why Li Yi asked this question, County Magistrate Lu answered honestly, although I haven't been in the capital for long, I know many famous country gentlemen and rich merchants near the capital. With many years of experience as a county magistrate, Lu Dayo knew clearly that if he wanted to make achievements in his jurisdiction, he had to build a good relationship with the local tyrants first. The capital was different from Anxi County. There were too many local tyrants here, and all of them were pythons. He couldn't get close to those high-ranking officials and nobles, but he had gotten to know quite a few of the smaller tycoons and magnates over the past year. That's easy. Li Yi nodded, looked at County Magistrate Lu and said, "There's something I need to ask Lord Lu to do." "I'll be very busy these days," County Magistrate Lu smiled and said, "It's my honor to work for Marquis and Her Highness." He had been with Li Yi for a long time, so he wouldn't refuse these things. After a while, County Magistrate Lu paced back and forth in the county government office alone, his face full of excitement. If the Marquis and the Princess had any good things, they would always think of him first. If this matter was completed, how great a merit would it be? This went on he, Li, Princess E, Magistrate Dayo, Li, and Emmings, Li, and asked. Li, Magistrate E with his hands. And said, Magistrate Li, Magistrate Dayo. Li E put his hands behind his head and said lazily, "How can I know if I don't try?" Li Yi had no way of explaining this to her. He was also using the experiences of his predecessors to do things. History was always shockingly similar. Many things would not change with the passage of time. Some principles were applicable to the entire universe. Li Emmings looked at him. "What are we going to do now?" "Go home for dinner." Li Yi stretched himself. "Shawning is also here. Do you want to join us?" What happened in the court had always been the focus of the insightful people in the capital. And the establishment of the academy was not limited to these insightful people. Because it was closely related to the common people, more people participated in it. They were always paying attention to the progress of this matter. Among them, there were many powerful people who could get the news from the Ministry of Rights. For example, which officials donated money, how much they donated, who was stingy, and why the officials of the Ministry of Rights were refused at the door, and so on. It was very detailed. Of course, there would occasionally be some messy things mixed in with this information. For example, an official from the Ministry of Revenue only donated 100 taels of silver to the academy. His son spent a lot of money on the top girl of a brothel that night. Another deputy director of the Ministry of Works who donated 50 taels of silver married a concubine the day before yesterday. He held a banquet at home. It was said that the food and wine ordered from Drunken Moon restaurant cost 100 taels of silver per table. Even if he only ordered 20 tables, it would still cost more than 1,000 taels of silver. Not to mention the fact that his concubine was a famous courtesan in the capital. The amount of money used to redeem her was clearly marked. The strings of numbers were written there, causing many people to suck in a breath of cold air when they saw it. Another example was a stingy official who refused the people of the Ministry of Rights outside the door. He spent thousands of taels of silver to buy a precious painting and took turns to invite friends to admire it. Thus, people discovered some things. There was money for prostitution, money for taking concubines, money for buying paintings, money for treating people to meals, but no money for donating money to the academy. In this day and age, there was no such thing as moral blackmail. Some people only felt that these officials were a bit rich and heartless. However, they did not violate the law, so others did not have the right to criticize them. However, this kind of knowledgeable people was, after all, a minority. In this world, most people were ordinary people who had not been educated and only had a shallow sense of right and wrong. Rich people only cared about their own pleasures and did not care about the lives of the common people. Officials who did not make decisions for the people deserved to be scolded. Of course, they did not dare to scold them openly. No one knew how much spittle they secretly spat at those rich and powerful families. In a private room of a tea house in the capital, an elegant middle-aged man looked at the man opposite him and said with a smile, "Sir Wu, that concubine of yours is famous in the capital for her skills in bed. Can your body withstand it?" Sir Wei does not need to worry about this matter. The man who was drinking tea glanced at him and said, "Your son is willing to spend 1,000 taels of gold for a prostitute." This kind of demeanor is probably comparable to that of Sir Wei in the past. The elegant middle-aged man waved his hand and said, "I have already taught that unfilial son a lesson. 1,000 taels of silver is a pity. Add another 2,000 taels and you can buy that mountain-dwelling painting of Yen Gong. Don't you think so, Sir Qi?" A man next to him glanced at him and said lightly, "You don't have to be cynical. I am willing to spend 3,000 taels of silver to buy a painting than to donate 30 taels of silver to them. There is no law in the Jing kingdom that states that I must donate." The elegant middle-aged man sighed and said, "But the people outside don't think so. Because of these things, the reputation of the people present was somewhat affected. As officials, they cherished their reputation very much. They gathered today because of the events that happened in the past 2 days. Just a bunch of stupid people." Sir Wu snorted and said, "When this matter is over, no one will talk about it anymore. I want to see how long she can hold on without money." Even on such an occasion, he still did not dare to call her name directly. She is still a woman after all. She is going against all the aristocratic families. Even His Majesty, let's just wait and see. It should be soon. If she can't raise the money, this matter can only be put aside. Let's see how she will explain to His Majesty and the officials. Laughter could be heard from the crowd, and the slightly tense atmosphere finally relaxed. "Tell your master." A street away from the tea house, County Magistrate Lu looked at the inquiring servant and said with a smile, "Tell him that the capital magistrate Lu Dayo has come to visit." County Magistrate Lu looked at Squire Zhao with a smile and asked, "I wonder if Squire Zhao is willing to be generous and do something for the poor students in the world?" Zhao Yuanwei was taken aback. Poor students? Poor students? What did it have to do with him? Why did he have to be so generous? It turned out that this Lord Lu had come today to ask him to donate money. The Zhao family was indeed rich, but this money did not grow on trees. Why should he donate it? A trace of dissatisfaction flashed in the depths of Zhao Yuanwei's eyes, but he didn't show it. The smile on his face became brighter and he said, "Of course I'm willing. I've always wanted to do something for the country. Zhao Fu, go to the accountant and get 100 taels of silver." 100 taels of silver was not much for him. It wouldn't cost him much, and he could give this Lord Lu an explanation. He didn't refuse at all. It was not a wise choice to offend County Magistrate Lu for a little money. So he simply set the amount so that County Magistrate Lu wouldn't ask again. County Magistrate Lu still had a smile on his face and said, "On behalf of the poor students in the world, I thank Squire Zhao in advance." Zhao Yuanwei nodded repeatedly, "It's my pleasure." The housekeeper of the Zhao family quickly took out 100 taels of silver, and naturally a runner helped to accept it. "I still have something to do, so I'll leave first." County Magistrate Lu and Zhao Yuanwei exchanged some polite words and then stood up to leave. Zhao Yuanwei stood up and said, "See Lord Lu off." Although he lost 100 taels of silver in vain, it was worth it to see this bodhisattva off. If it weren't for the fact that I really can't take out so much silver, I would like to donate more. When they walked to the gate of the mansion, County Magistrate Lu shook his head and said, "Squire Su from the south of the city donated 3,000 taels of silver to a library for the academy. Shopkeeper Zhang from the north of the city donated 1,000 taels of silver to a school. I'm afraid both of them have the opportunity to be listed on the academy stele. I'm very envious." Academy stele? Dare I ask, what is an academy stele? Zhao Yuanwei didn't hear him mention this matter just now, so he asked doubtfully. County Magistrate Lu smiled and explained, "To build so many academies in various places, a large amount of silver is needed. The National Treasury can't take out so much money in a short time, so we can only collect donations from various places. When Squire Su donated to the library, a stele will be erected in front of the library. It will clearly state who donated it, so that the students will remember who gave them books to study and whose kindness they should be indebted to. In front of the school donated by shopkeeper Zhang, there will also be a similar stele. As for the academy stele, it will be erected in front of the entire academy. You will see it before you enter the gate. It is personally written by His Majesty. Anyone who has contributed to the academy can be nominated on the academy stele. The purpose is to let the students remember who gave them everything they have. Unfortunately, the academy stele will only be erected once. After this time, unless one has made an extremely significant contribution to the academy, it will be impossible to be nominated. Hearing this, Zhao Yuanwei stopped in his tracks and stood there in a daze. This Sir Lu didn't mention this to him just now. He, Zhao Ritian, had spent half of his life in business. It was fine if people looked down on him, but he didn't want his children and grandchildren to be like this. He didn't want his children to be unable to hold their heads up high forever and never be able to walk with their backs straight. Therefore, he didn't mind spending a lot of money to hire the best teachers for his son, buying the best paper and pens. He even hired 4 study companions. Wasn't it all for the sake of his son's future success, to pass the imperial examinations, and for the Zhao family to get rid of the shadow of being a family of merchants? Why did he do all this? Wasn't it for fame? Donating to the school, donating to the library, and carving his name on the stele in front of the academy. That stele was personally written by His Majesty? From today onwards, who would dare to look down on him, Zhao Ritian? Who would dare to be dissatisfied? If you have the ability, why don't you carve your name on the stele and let His Majesty personally write it? That was an academy, after all. Who knew how many people who graduated from there would achieve success and fame in the future, soaring into the sky with a single leap? At that time, perhaps those officials in the imperial court would occasionally remember the familiar name they saw on the academy's monument when they were young and studying. Zhao Ritian. Even if there was only one person who remembered it, it was enough for him and the Zhao family. Not to mention how much those high-ranking officials would remember the kindness of the past, other than the tombstone. To be able to carve his name on the stele was something that he could brag about for the rest of his life. Just now, County Magistrate Lu said that this opportunity was only available once. If he missed this opportunity, there wouldn't be another one like this. Damn Squire Su. He was indebted to him in the past, but he didn't bring him along for such a good thing. A hint of anger appeared on Zhao Yunwei's face, but it quickly disappeared. The smile on his face was unprecedentedly bright. He caught up with County Magistrate Lu in a few steps. Seeing that County Magistrate Lu was about to step out of the mansion, he hurriedly said, "Sir, please wait." County Magistrate Lu looked back at him and smiled. "Oh, Squire Zhao, is there anything else?" Chapter 768. About the donation of silver. I suddenly feel that we should do our part in such a good thing for the country and the people. Only by building more academies can more poor students have access to education and cultivate more talents for the country. Yes, that's it. The more Officer Zhao spoke, the more confident he became. In the end, the expression on his face became extremely sincere and proud. So, I want to donate more silver to the academy. Lord Lu, let's talk about it in detail? County Magistrate Lu nodded and said with a smile, "I'm very pleased that Officer Zhao has such a kind intention." "Sir, please, Officer Zhao, please." 3,000 taels of silver was not a small amount even for the Zhao family. However, he had worked hard for silver all his life. At this moment, silver itself was not so important to him. When one reached such a position, he would understand that some things couldn't be bought with silver. Some things couldn't be solved with silver. Therefore, after thinking for a long time, he gave another number. It was 30 times more than the 100 taels he had promised. County Magistrate Lu said with a smile, "Officer Zhao, if you are generous, the poor students of the academy will remember you. It's all for the country." Officer Zhao was waiting for this sentence. He couldn't confirm whether what County Magistrate Lu said was true or not, but he thought that County Magistrate Lu wouldn't lie to him. After all, County Magistrate Lu was a high-ranking official and couldn't lie to him. "There's one more thing I need to ask of Officer Zhao," County Magistrate Lu said while looking at him. "Sir, please speak your mind. I'm not familiar with the rich merchants around the capital city. I hope Officer Zhao can visit them. After all, one person's strength is limited. If there are more people as generous as Officer Zhao, of course. Don't worry, I'll take care of it. Officer Zhao answered repeatedly with a burst of ecstasy in his heart. The importance of this matter was self-evident. County Magistrate Lu actually entrusted this important task to him. If he could handle this matter well and properly, he would have a say in the county magistrate's office in the future, let alone in the long run. This was something that couldn't be bought with 3,000 taels of silver. No matter how he looked at it, he wouldn't lose money. Of course, at the same time, he thought of another matter. The Zhao family did have some money, but they were not arrogant enough to think that the Zhao family was the wealthiest merchant in the capital. Once everyone gathered and learned the truth, wouldn't they all rush to donate money? At that time, it would be hard to say if his name would still be left on the academy stele. After all, he believed that those people wouldn't reject the opportunity to leave their names behind. Of course, he had just confirmed with County Magistrate Lu that after the funds of an academy were collected, the rest would be used to build other academies. This academy couldn't be named, but there would always be others. But for the sake of safety, he had to be careful. He waved his hand at the housekeeper and said, "Go to the accounts room and withdraw 2,000 taels of silver." When he returned to the chess room again, his friend could not wait any longer. "County Magistrate Lu, what brings you here?" A stout middle-aged man looked at him and asked with great surprise, "When did you know County Magistrate Lu?" Zhao Yuanwei smiled mysteriously and said, "Let's not rush this matter. I have something great to tell you, as expected of Lord Li." County Magistrate Lu walked out of the Zhao mansion, sighed, and murmured, "Brilliant, really brilliant. The 5,000, to be precise, it should be 5,100 taels of silver. It was as easy as blowing off dust. He didn't even need to say anything, and the other party would take the initiative to come to him, as if afraid that he wouldn't accept it. It was even easier than robbing. He knew how cold the officials from the Ministry of Rights were treated when they went to visit each and every one of them. It was really a world of difference. Moreover, after walking out of the Zhao mansion, he thought of a more important thing. It was true that merchants loved their names, but some people seemed to love their names even more. In just a few days, the entire capital city would once again be bustling with noise and excitement. A yamen runner stood behind him and asked, "Lord, where are we going now?" "To the Su mansion." "Which Su mansion?" "Su mansion in the south of the city." An hour later, a fat man with a protruding belly and a face full of fat sent County Magistrate Lu out of the mansion and said with a smile, "Take care, Lord." When he turned his head, his face instantly became gloomy. "Damn, such an important thing, surnamed Zhao actually didn't tell me." Behind County Magistrate Lu, the yamen runner still understood and said with a smile, "Lord, I know. Let's go to shopkeeper Zhang's mansion now." "Hee, father, you lost again." The proud Lolita jumped up from her seat and shouted happily. If she won 10 games against her father, she could go out of the palace to play once. If she won 20 games against her father, she could also bring Yongning. Therefore, she now played chess with her father every day. She had saved up for many days. She had already decided in her heart that when she had saved 10 days for both of them, she could go out of the palace with Yongning and did not need to come back for 10 days. Emperor Jing touched her head lovingly and said, "Shawning, go play first. Father is a little tired. We will play again in the afternoon." The proud Lolita nodded obediently. In order not to let her pester him, he simply let them eat hot pot alone. Emingzu walked over and looked at him. "There's morning court tomorrow. I don't think I can hide it for long." "It's about time. I don't plan to hide it for long." Li Yi added some seasonings to the soup and closed the lid. Then he asked, "The money should be enough to build the academies near the capital, right?" Li Mingzhu nodded. The capital could be said to be filled with wealthy merchants. The amount of silver they donated added up to a terrifying figure. According to the plan, it would be more than enough to build a dozen large academies. It would even be enough to keep these academies operating for a long time. Even when General Shui, the family of generals, and other acquaintances came to her. Although they didn't know the inside story, they were willing to donate some money. But she rejected them with the same reason. It was not time to unveil the veil on this matter yet. Of course, although there was already a lot of money, it was still a long way from covering the entire Jing kingdom. But the money would only be used in the capital. Every place would adopt the form of local donations. Presumably, those people would be more willing to let their names spread locally. As long as the precedent was set in the capital, it would be much easier for the other states and prefectures. If they followed this method, it would not be unimaginable for Emingzu academies to spread throughout the Jing kingdom one day. After tomorrow, we should receive more money. The amount will be very large. How to spend it is a problem. This is just the beginning. In the future, the scope will be wider and there will be more money. Li Yi adjusted the fire to a gentle one and said, also, to do these things, it's impossible to rely on just you or me. If you want to find someone trustworthy, you can find someone from the Women's Union or other places. Ability is important, but you have to ensure absolute loyalty. These shouldn't be a problem for you. Emingzu pondered over his words and nodded slightly. There's one more important thing. Seeing him speak again, Emingzu turned to look at him with a serious gaze. Li Yi opened the lid of the clay pot and scooped some soup. He passed the bowl to her and said, "Help me taste this soup. Is it ready?" Chapter 770. The higher-ranking officials in the capital had been living comfortably these past few days. They had not attended court for a few months and no longer had to wake up in the dark. Sometimes, they did not even have time to eat breakfast before rushing to the palace gates to gather. They had to stand in the hall for 4 hours and their backs were sore. They also had to drag their tired bodies to various departments to handle various chores. Now, they could sleep until dawn, drink their morning tea, and slowly make their way to the yamen. If they were the leaders of various departments, as long as they were not seen by the imperial censors, they could relax even more. Of course, if they received news that morning court was to be held, even the laziest of people would have to restrain themselves and obediently stand at the palace gates for an hour to enjoy the morning breeze. Although it was still summer, the sun had not risen yet. Wearing thin clothes, it was still a little cold. Old General Shui stomped his feet and wrapped his clothes tightly around himself. He sighed, "These old bones are getting worse and worse. I wonder how many more days I can attend court." Old General Ma walked over and said, "We old bones do not have much time left. Luckily, those children are not bad. Old Shui, you can rest in peace even after you die." Before the morning court began, when the officials were waiting at the palace gates, they had to line up according to their official rank and department. They were not allowed to walk around casually, nor were they allowed to congregate casually. There would be a special imperial censor to record the officials' behavior and record it as part of their evaluation. A few imperial censors glanced at the elders of the family of generals who were gathered together, then quickly shifted their gazes away. When they caught a glimpse of an official in the crowd who was secretly touching his buttocks, they immediately walked over with dark expressions and said coldly, "Sir, please pay attention to your manners." The official had wanted to quietly adjust his pants but did not expect to be seen by the imperial censor. He could only look at his nose and his heart. After the imperial censor left, he glanced at the few people who were squatting and chatting under a tree not far away. An indescribable bitterness rose in his heart. This time, Old General Shui did not engage in a verbal battle with Old General Ma. He sighed and said, "What is Her Highness thinking?" The Her Highness he was referring to was naturally the eldest princess. The incident at the academy had caused a commotion. Countless people in court were waiting to see her make a fool of herself, but she seemed to have completely forgotten about it. She had not done anything in the past few days. The family of generals had wanted to help, but she had rejected them. This was because the establishment of the academy would not only involve the capital, but also the entire Jing kingdom. Even the national treasury would not be able to take out so much silver. Lu Dao stepped forward and said respectfully, "Your Majesty, So far, a total of more than 500,000 taels of silver has been raised. 13 academies in the capital city are already under construction. 500,000 taels of silver. This number still made many people's hearts skip a beat. This was not a small number. Everyone knew that when the Ministry of Rights raised money, they hit a wall at every turn. Not to mention 500,000 taels of silver, they could not even raise 5,000 taels of silver. In just a few days, where did this 500,000 taels of silver come from? They heard clearly that Lu Dao said raise money, which meant that this money was not allocated by the national treasury. Where did they raise it from? Their doubts did not last long. Lu Dao had already continued. Most of these 500,000 taels of silver were donated by the merchants in the capital city. I have already followed your Majesty's instructions and ordered people to build a stone tablet. Once the academy is built, the stone tablet with the names of the donors will be erected in front of the academy, so that the students and the people will remember their contributions to the academy. As Lu Dao spoke slowly, the expressions of many officials in the imperial court changed from confusion and astonishment to shock and fear. How could such a thing happen? Those people were only lowly merchants. What right did they have to carve their names on the tablet for the students and the people to revere and pass down from generation to generation? And after today, what would the people of the world think of them? Even merchants knew to contribute to the country. How could they, the aristocratic families that had been passed down from generation to generation, not know? One had to know that, unlike the ordinary officials in the imperial court, the reputation of their families had been accumulated bit by bit. They loved the people and were kind and charitable. They had accumulated bit by bit over decades. With that stone tablet erected in front of the academy, the reputation and fame that they had painstakingly accumulated was all gone. Bah, what aristocratic families! They were not even as good as merchants. How would they have the face to call themselves aristocratic families in the future? In particular, the true aristocratic families were able to stand for hundreds of years without falling. They relied on the terrifying reputation that they had accumulated over a long period of time. If even their reputation was gone, and they had even abandoned the trust of the people and the aristocratic families, no matter how large a family was, it would still be at the end of its road. This simple stone tablet had left these aristocratic families with no other choice. Donate, they had to donate. Lost money could be earned again, but lost reputation was irreversible. Of course, some people's choices were very simple, while others were more difficult. For example, the officials of the Ministry of Rights had visited. If they didn't donate, they would definitely be reviled by the people. If the merchants donated, the other aristocratic families would also donate, which would expose them. In the future, would they still have a foothold in the capital city and the Jing Kingdom? Donate, how much should they donate? They had previously donated dozens or hundreds of taels of silver, and even had a very unpleasant relationship with the officials of the Ministry of Rights. If they went up to donate again with a straight face, how would they have any face left? Even if they donated, they wouldn't have much face left. It was obviously a remedial measure, which would make people despise them even more. So here came the problem. Should they donate or not? At this moment, they had never hated the officials of the Ministry of Rights so much. However, there were many people who looked at her with more emotions than before. Even though she had done many things that men couldn't do before, they couldn't help but look down on her because of her gender. However, after this incident, no matter who it was, they had to seriously retract their underestimation of her. Some people even rejoiced in their hearts. Fortunately, she was a woman. Fortunately, she was only a princess. If she were a prince, it would be enough to make all the brothers who had a chance of inheriting the throne, including the king of Shu, lose all hope. No matter how many things she had done, how great her reputation was, and how much power she held in her hands, at the end of the day, she was just a woman. Li Yi learned of this news in the afternoon when Wang Yong came to visit him at home. Wang Yong's visit this time was not to discuss business, nor was it to specifically tell him about these things. He was just implicitly asking if he could leave a good spot for the Wang family on the academy stele. Of course he could. The academy was the child of him and the eldest princess. As a father, he could still make the decision on this matter. It was not only because the Wang family was Li Xian's father-in-law, but also because the Li family and the Wang family had a friendly working relationship. Without knowing it, the Wang family was willing to donate 100,000 taels of silver to support him and the eldest princess's unborn child. This was a favor that could not be easily repaid. Li Yi looked at him and asked, "The Wang family donated 200,000 taels of silver to the academy. It is enough to leave a name in all the academies in the capital. However, Brother Wang, do you think it is enough?" Wang Yong was stunned and asked, "Brother Li, what do you mean?" For example, part of the 200,000 taels of silver could be used as a reward for outstanding students. On the one hand, it could help the poor students improve their lives, and on the other hand, it could stimulate them to study hard. It is killing two birds with one stone. Li Yi thought for a while and asked, "How about this sum of silver be called the Wang Family Scholarship or the Wang Yong Scholarship?" The old emperor did not attack the aristocratic families indiscriminately. In fact, he was gradually weakening the disobedient aristocratic families. As for the Wang family, who were sensible and had a close relationship with the royal family, the old emperor adopted a policy of cozying them up and appeasing them. Therefore, Li Yi did not mind giving the Wang family another benefit. The Wang Family Scholarship? Wang Yong's eyes suddenly lit up. It was good to have one's name engraved on the stone tablet. It was not certain that one's name would go down in history, but it would exist for a longer period of time. This scholarship, which he had never heard of before, was obviously another great thing for the Wang family. The students supported by the scholarship were definitely people of outstanding talent. Since they accepted the Wang family's support, they would definitely owe the Wang family a favor and could be considered half a student of the Wang family. And such people of outstanding talent would also have a very high chance of becoming outstanding in the future. Not everyone was expected to repay the Wang family, but after all, they would have an unbreakable connection with the Wang family. In just an instant, Wang Yong weighed the pros and cons in his mind. The conclusion he came to was that there were only pros and no cons. He raised his head to look at Li Yi and said sincerely, "Those 200,000 taels were donated by the Wang family to build the academy. How can I take money from them? How about this? I'll go back and ask for instructions." Every year, a sum of money will be used to set up the Wang Family Scholarship, which will be used to support students with excellent character and scholarship. Li Yi did not mind this at all. The money would eventually be used on those students. The Wang family were not fools. They definitely understood what Wang Yong understood. He was only pointing it out. When the time came, they could discuss it with the eldest princess themselves. "I'll take my leave first." Wang Yong was in a hurry to report to the family. Li did not stay any longer. From now on, he did not need to interfere in this matter anymore. Education was a century-long project. It would take a long time to show its effects. But now that the foundation was stable, there would be fewer obstacles in the future. He had written down everything about the academy in great detail on a piece of paper. Her Highness just had to follow the prescribed order. Of course, she still had to control some of the details herself. Li did not want to arrange everything for her. She was able to handle the women's union, various businesses, and the affairs of the women's college so perfectly. It was enough to show her ability. There would be more things she had to decide and deal with in the future. She could not become dependent. Li Yi needed to extinguish the seeds that had just arisen as soon as possible. Li Yi stared blankly in a certain direction. When he made this happen, he actually did not feel much of a sense of achievement. Instead, he was a little hesitant. This was after all his wishful thinking. He could not tell anyone, including her. But no one knew better than him how difficult and long this path would be. Whether it could be replicated was still unknown. If things did not develop in the direction he had planned, it would be more harmful than beneficial for her to have such power and resources in her hands. Most importantly, before the old emperor passed away, he did not think he could help her reach that step. That day would come sooner or later. Who would be the new emperor? What would her future be like? Chapter 772. When talking about life and ideals with a beauty, the choice of time and place was very important. Under the warm yellow light, on the soft bed, chatting through the night, or in the quiet courtyard, next to a clean stone table, drinking a pot of fragrant tea, chatting leisurely. These were two completely different moods. Of course, the former was not about the moods. Hearing his words, the princess shook her head after a moment of hesitation, thinking that he was just joking. She changed the topic and said, "The aristocratic families that refused to donate money before have changed their attitude and donated more than those merchants." Li Yi waved his hand and interrupted her. "I said we won't talk about this. Today, we only talk about life and ideals." Immerse looked at him, and her expression was no longer serious. She picked up the teacup and took a sip, quietly waiting for him to continue. Li Yi looked at her and asked, "Seriously, what's your plan for the future?" Immerse thought for a while and said, "I'll settle the academy first. I've been busy for a long time." The future that Li Yi mentioned was naturally more long-term than hers. He asked again, "What about 5 years later? 10 years later? 5 years later? 10 years later?" Immerse was stunned. Under Li Yi's gaze, she shook her head and said, "It's too far away. I've never thought about it." She had no ambition. It was fine if she had big breasts but had no ambition. She had such a small breasts but had no ambition either. After the old emperor ascended, what would happen to the eldest princess who had lost her protection? It would be a happy ending for her to be betrothed to the son of a meritorious minister. With the power in her hands, it seemed unlikely that such a good ending would happen. She would most likely be suspected and coveted by others. Even if the king of Shu was not the emperor, he would be some other king. Speaking of which, if she continued to be a princess who was only responsible for her beautiful appearance, it was very likely that she would spend the rest of her life peacefully like most princesses in the history books. However, it was impossible for her to go back now that she had come this far. She thought about it carefully. How did she end up on this path? Her life was originally smooth and smooth. Cough, cough. Li took a sip of tea and choked on his own tea. After coughing twice, he waved his hand and said, "Forget it, forget it. If you haven't thought about it, then don't think about it. The most important thing in life is to be happy." It didn't matter how she came to this path. Since she couldn't turn back, she might as well walk this path to the end. It would be great if she could wait for the light of dawn, but if she couldn't, she would just rob it. As for the rest of the mess, who wanted to mess with it, as soon as his thoughts were clear, he felt as though his entire being had relaxed. When Immerse looked at Li Yi, she realized that he was also looking at her. His gaze was very strange. There was hope, worry, and love in his eyes. Behind those indescribable gazes, there was a kind of emotion that she could clearly feel. The will to fight. Although she didn't know why he would have such thoughts, at this moment, she felt that it was funny. She looked at Li Yi with a faint smile and asked, "You want to fight with me?" Li Yi was actually thinking that he might not be a match for the eldest princess at that time. Should he ask for a helper or something? He was startled when he heard that and then laughed. "Are you kidding me? Why would I want to fight with you? The soup is still boiling in the kitchen. I'll go and see if it's ready. By the way, are you thirsty? Do you want me to serve you a bowl of soup?" Although he hadn't fought with her before, he was definitely not a match for someone who could fight with Mississippi Lu. Just the thought of fighting with her made him feel a dull pain in his butt again. The two little girls were better. Girls should be gentle and virtuous. Why should they learn martial arts? Although the words gentle and virtuous had nothing to do with the arrogant Lolita, they were both learning martial arts. Look at Rui. She was already a master, but she didn't use martial arts to bully others. Look at her and Mississippi Lu, who always talked about fighting with each other. How could they act like girls? Sir, come and play chess with me." The arrogant Lolita waved her hand in the room. Li Yi walked over and replaced Duan Wu. As long as the word chess was involved, the arrogant Lolita couldn't be treated as a child. Even an adult would fall into her hands if they weren't careful. It was said that the old emperor had lost dozens of games to her. She was now obsessed with Gamoku. Ever since Li Yi taught her this way of playing, The entire women's college, including the teachers and students, were unwilling to play with her in a few days. It was not easy to find someone who was willing to play chess with her. Li Yi and the arrogant Lolita played chess. Yong Ning stood beside him with her hands behind her back and her head peeking at the chessboard. Thinking of something, Li Yi looked at her and asked with a smile, "Cindy, if I'm going to a place far away and won't come back for a long time, would you be willing to go with me?" The little girl was stunned for a moment. The expression on her little face immediately became nervous. She pulled Li Yi's arm and asked hurriedly, "Where are you going?" "A place far away from here. There might be no rocking cars, no merry-go-round, no delicious food, no fun. Wherever Big Brother goes, X and E will go." Before Li Yi could finish, the little girl hugged his arm and said with a serious face. She clenched her fists tightly, as though she was worried that Li Yi would disappear if she let go. They were both going to catch bandits, but what they were going to do in the future was much more exciting than catching bandits. "Father will definitely not agree." The arrogant Lolita's eyes darted around as she muttered. At a certain moment, she suddenly grabbed Li Yi's arm and said with a face full of expectation, "How about we elope without Father knowing?" Li Yi looked at her in shock. At a certain moment, he suddenly felt very sinful. He felt like a bad uncle who kidnapped a little girl. Chapter 773. The proud Lolita was already 13 years old. In the future, 13-year-old girls already knew a lot of things. In this world, if a girl was born in a poor family, she would be able to support herself and even get married at the age of 13. However, the proud Lolita grew up in the palace. Among all the princes and princesses, she was the kind of person who was surrounded by the stars. She had never suffered much, so her mental age was obviously younger. Li Yi looked at her and explained helplessly, "Well, eloping requires two people who like each other first. Sir, don't you like Shawning?" The proud Lolita looked at him pitifully. Her big watery eyes blinked and she looked like she was about to cry. Li Yi covered his eyes and couldn't bear to look anymore. He nodded and said, "All right, I'll bring you along." Seeing that the proud Lolita was about to pounce on him, Li Yi hurriedly reached out his hand. "Stop, play chess properly." The proud Lolita rolled her eyes at Li Yi and sat back. If he didn't let her kiss him, then so be it. After a while, they would elope together. Sir once wrote a poem, what was it again? If two people love each other for a long time, why would they stay together day and night? Since they were going to elope, one less kiss was no big deal. When he was in a good mood, his thoughts were naturally smooth. Even the speed at which he placed the chess pieces was much faster. Therefore, Li Yi soon realized that he was probably about to lose. Losing to his own disciple was a very embarrassing thing. Li Yi decided to concentrate and see if he could salvage the situation. "Look, what's that?" His face suddenly showed a look of surprise and pointed behind the proud Lolita. The proud Lolita turned her head and looked for a while before turning back with some dissatisfaction and muttering, "What? There's clearly nothing." She picked up a chess piece and was about to put it on the position that she had chosen just now. As long as this chess piece was placed, Sir would lose. However, her hand had only landed halfway when she looked at the chessboard in a daze with a puzzled expression. "Shawning's Gamoku is getting better and better, but don't be proud. Continue to work hard." Li Yi smiled and patted her little head. He stood up and walked out of the house. "Sir, you cheated." After a moment of silence, a crisp sound rang out. A petite figure pounced over from behind. After a while, Li Yi shook his head and turned his collar up a little to hide the shallow bite marks on his neck. He did not know where she learned this from. She grabbed the neck and bit it. Although it was not heavy, if others saw it, it would be inappropriate for a princess to do so. How could an unmarried princess be so intimate with a man? He might even be mistaken for having a bad intention of abducting the princess. After the matter of the academy was completely settled, there were people to take care of everything. After sending away the arrogant Lolita, he had a lot of free time. He thought that after dinner, he would accompany Rui to the school of divination. The scenery by the lake was good, and fishing in the pavilion in the middle of the lake would be a small pleasure. He of Chang and County Dean of Chang'an College, but had of free time. In the past few days, the gate of the county government was almost broken by people. Of course, they didn't come to complain, but to give money. After the morning assembly that day, all the officials and aristocratic families in the capital city sent their servants to the county government to register. The amount of silver they donated increased from thousands to tens of thousands. In 2 days, the amount had reached millions of silver. Of course, not only did they donate silver, but they also donated materials, mostly books. Whether the academy could use them or not, he accepted them all. This matter was well done, and he didn't disappoint the eldest princess and Lord Li. County Magistrate Lu waved to a runner happily and pointed to the red paper on the table. He said, "Come on, put this one up too." The outer wall of the county government had been covered with red paper. The black ink on the red paper was particularly conspicuous. It was a detailed record of the donations of the big families every day. After it was arranged according to the amount, it was posted outside the county government, attracting the attention of countless people. In this way, the families who had been watching could not sit still, and the families who donated less could not sit still. Those who didn't donate could hide for a while, but sooner or later, they would be found out and regarded as the example of the heartless rich. Those who donated less would be ranked behind most of the families. They would lose face and might as well not donate at all. They could only increase the amount to improve their ranking. But in their hearts, they cursed the person who came up with such a bad idea. Fortunately, the reputation of the family could be preserved. The loss of some silver was just a loss, but the foundation of the family couldn't be lost. But some people weren't so lucky. Although the Chui clan and several clans that were on good terms with the Chui clan had also donated silver, at the beginning when the officials of the Ministry of Rights visited them, they had offended them a lot, and even donated the humiliating price of 50 taels of silver. Later, they were exposed to be extravagant and wasteful in other aspects, which greatly damaged their reputation. Even if they had taken remedial measures afterward and donated a lot of silver, it was difficult for them to recover the lost part of their reputation. The eldest princess once again showed her ability in front of the public. Although she didn't do it casually, it made the whole capital city, and the whole Jing kingdom in the future, excited. No one knew where he found those mad scientists, but he didn't need to supervise them at all. He only went to check the progress every once in a while. Most of the time, he was in the mathematics academy. At this time, he and the young man named Shinshu, whom Li had met once or twice, were sitting in the pavilion in front of them. They seemed to be studying some profound problem. Li looked at the booklet in his hand. It was the one he had given him before. There were some basic physical and chemical knowledge in it. It was hard to imagine that besides Li Xian, there was actually someone who was interested in these things. No wonder Li Xian could stick with him all day long. From the day that Princess Shitzi was found to be pregnant, she was taken to the palace by the Empress. Li Xian had to get the Empress's permission to see her. Except for Princess Shitzi, he didn't have any other concubines. For such a long time, he didn't find a woman, but found a man. This was really worrying. The soup that son-in-law made was very delicious, but if she drank too much, her chest would always swell. It felt a little strange. It wasn't really uncomfortable, but that place always made people feel embarrassed to talk about it, let alone talk about it to son-in-law. Was this what son-in-law meant by growing up? When Li walked out of the door, Mississippi Lu was wiping her eyes. Li felt that she treated the sword better than him. If he and the sword fell into the water at the same time, Mississippi Lu would definitely choose to fish for the sword instead of him. What kind of unspeakable promise did she and Rui have? This question had been on his mind since yesterday. If he didn't ask, he would feel uncomfortable. So, Li decided to ask in a roundabout way. Li walked to her side and asked curiously, "What kind of promise did you and Rui have when you were young?" "What promise?" Mississippi Lou glanced at him and continued to bury her head in wiping her eyes. She only asked blandly. Looking at her appearance, she seemed to have completely forgotten about this matter. It seemed like it wasn't important. Li shook his head. His curiosity was greatly reduced. Instead, he was puzzled as to why Rui would be secretive about something that wasn't important. It's nothing. You can continue. I'm going to cook. He didn't want Mississippi Lou to know that he was prying into her privacy. He turned around and walked in the direction of the kitchen. Promise? That's strange. Mississippi Lou looked up at him and murmured. When she lowered her head again, she seemed to have thought of something. Her hands suddenly stopped moving and her body stiffened. Promise? At this moment, a memory that was long ago but engraved in the depths of her mind quietly emerged. Before Li could step into the kitchen, a white shadow flashed in front of him. Mississippi Lou instantly appeared in front of him. She looked at him with a face full of embarrassment and annoyance. What do you know? What do you mean? Li looked at her in surprise and asked in confusion. Mississippi Lou stared at his face closely. When she found that there was nothing but confusion on his face, she finally felt relieved. It seemed that he just did it unintentionally. At this moment, he had forgotten about what just happened. Nothing. She waved her hand and turned to leave. Li stopped her in time. When she turned around, he asked curiously, "What on earth did you two promise?" Chapter 775. It was fine if she didn't want to tell him, but she hit him just because he asked about the agreement. Li rubbed his butt and was even more curious about their agreement. Rui would never hide anything from him. But if she didn't tell him after he asked her once, he would get the same result even if he asked her 10 times or 100 times. It was almost impossible to break through from her. As for the Liu family's second young lady, he would think about how to strike at her in a subtle way after his but had recovered in 2 days. In the morning, someone from the palace came to inform him that he had to go to court tomorrow. He had just been free for a few days, and he didn't know what the old emperor was going to do, which made him feel like he was in trouble. Li sat down and poured a cup of tea, wondering if he should take a sick leave. His butt hurt a little, so he had to rest for at least half a month. But the old emperor didn't let him go to court usually. If he specially sent someone to inform him, it meant that something really happened. If he asked for a sick leave now, it might be Chang who came to pick him up tomorrow. He'd better go and have a look. After all, he was worried about Princess Royal. He wanted to see how she was progressing in the study. It wasn't easy to have a good start, so he couldn't let anything go wrong. "Husband, why did you provoke Rui?" Li lay on the bed. Rui shook her head and slowly pressed a certain part of his butt. "I just want to ask what the agreement was." She didn't answer. "Why did you hit her?" "No man can stand her temper. I'm afraid we'll have to raise her for the rest of her life." Li groaned comfortably. In fact, Mississippi Lou didn't hit him hard today, so his butt didn't hurt anymore. It was more comfortable to be massaged by Rui. "Husband, did you ask Rui?" Rui was stunned, and then she smiled and said, "Husband, you don't know anything, but you asked her rashly. Of course she will be angry." Li didn't ask again this time. Rui naturally had her reasons for not saying it. He didn't want her to feel the slightest bit embarrassed. "When Rui was young, she always liked to stay by my side. At that time, Mother asked her what she would do when Big Sister got married." Recalling what happened when they were young, Rui smiled. "At that time, Rui hugged me and said that when she grew up, she wanted to marry the same person as Big Sister so that they could be together forever. At that time, she was still young, so how could she understand these things? Children's words carry no harm. After she grew up, no one was allowed to mention it." Li was a little dazed as he listened. He couldn't help but imagine a silly and adorable little girl hugging her sister and swearing that she would marry the same person and be with him forever. Who would have thought that the silly and adorable little girl would grow up to be like this? Li thought that she had developed this character since she was young. He didn't expect that when Mississippi Lou was young, she was no different from an ordinary little girl. It was just a naive vow of a little girl. Whether it was him or Rui, they naturally wouldn't take it seriously. They just occasionally thought about it, and perhaps it had a different feeling. Li Yi lay on the bed, thinking about what it should be like at that time. He didn't know when he fell asleep. When he opened his eyes, the sky was already bright. Rui walked in from outside and put the hot water aside. She said, "The people from the palace are already waiting outside. Husband, get up and wash up quickly." Li Yi had always felt that it was a very inhumane rule to stand at the palace gate 1 to 4 hours before the cold wind blew. After the cold wind blew enough, he still had to stand in the main hall and wait for the emperor to come out. It would take a long time. He just needed to reach the main hall before the old emperor. As for what the censor would say, would he care about these people who gossiped? When he went out and saw Mississippi Lu, Li Yi subconsciously made a gesture of covering his butt. This made him feel very embarrassed, especially when he saw the trace of mockery in her eyes. The desire to take revenge became stronger. Unfortunately, he could only imagine it. If he wanted to pay the price, he would definitely be the one who suffered a crushing defeat. Li looked at her and said with a smile, "Does the promise you and Rui made when you were young still count?" If he couldn't fight back physically, he would defeat her spiritually. For Mississippi Lu, who cared a lot about her reputation, the latter was far more effective than the former. Sure enough, after hearing this, her expression froze. Her face turned cold, and she slowly raised her hand that was holding autumn water. Li had a smile on his face. He was not worried at all. The people from the palace were standing not far away. In front of outsiders, Mississippi Lu would never do anything to him. Sure enough, she raised her hand halfway and then slowly put it down. Li smiled. This was his first victory in the recent confrontation with Mississippi Lu. A complete victory. Just as Li was thinking about this, the frost on Mississippi Lu's face suddenly melted like snow. She actually smiled. It was a smile that Li Yi had never seen before. To be precise, it was a smile that he had never seen on her face. Li Yi couldn't help but shiver. This was a very strange feeling. Second young Lady Lu, whose face was as cold as frost, gave him the feeling of a warm sun in March, like a spring breeze. But when she revealed a smile that was exactly the same as Rui, it was like a basin of ice water was poured over his head, making him feel cold from head to toe. Mississippi Lu put autumn water down, maintaining a faint smile on her face. At this time, Li Yi really felt that she and Rui were really sisters. He had seen this kind of smile on Rui's face countless times. She reached out to help Li Yi adjust his collar. Her eyebrows were full of smiles and she said softly, "Come back early. I'll wait for you at home." Li Yi felt that the ice water that was poured on him was beginning to freeze. I'm leaving." He didn't dare to look at Mississippi Lu again. He quickly turned his head and almost ran away. Because he had made a major mistake in estimating the enemy's strength, he was once again defeated in a new round of confrontation with Mississippi Lu. Mississippi Lu stared blankly in a certain direction. When she picked up autumn water again, she found that her palms were full of sweat. Li got into the carriage, his heart was still beating wildly. Strange, too strange. Mississippi Lu actually smiled at him like that, helped him adjust his collar, looked at him with a smile like Rui, and said like a little wife, "Come back early, I'll wait for you at home." What was wrong with this world? The guards at the palace gate still had a deadpan expression. The passage leading to the palace was still narrow, and the officials stood in the main hall as usual, waiting for the emperor to appear. Li ignored the censor's gaze and walked to the pillar he was most familiar with. When he leaned against it, he realized that the world was still this world. As for whether Mississippi Lu was still Mississippi Lu, it was not certain. For the first time, he thought that today's morning court would end slowly. He was worried that when he returned home, Mississippi Lu would be standing at the door with the same smile on her face. She said to him with a smile, "You're back." If that was really the case, he would go to the cold mountain temple today. Whether the old monk Tan Yin was in seclusion or not, he would kidnap him. And the old Taoist Yuan from last time, he didn't know where his Taoist temple was. He shouldn't be in a hurry to become an immortal. The most important thing now was to help Mississippi Lu exorcise the evil spirits. Naturally, he would have some selfishness in the matters of the academy and would do something for the family of generals. Of course, apart from this, there was another reason that could not be stated clearly. However, he had to discuss this matter with them in advance. Otherwise, they would think that he was abusing the elderly and squeezing out the remaining value of the old generals. He couldn't take the blame for that. Really, old General Shui didn't seem to care at all about squeezing out the remaining value of him. Instead, he was in high spirits. Li Yi nodded and said, "Of course, but this has to be agreed upon by the old generals. After all, no one in the Jing Kingdom knows better than you all when it comes to arranging troops, breaking through enemy lines, and charging. When the time comes, it will still be you who will manage the entire academy. Of course, the nominal dean will be Her Royal Highness. When all the academies in the country were built, the eldest princess would be the dean of all the academies. Not just in name, she would be equivalent to the Minister of Education of the Jing Kingdom. This position would not be given to anyone else by the royal family. Don't worry. Those old fellows would love to have something to do when the time comes." Of course, old General Shui understood what he meant. The imperial court wouldn't completely hand over such an academy to them. It was better to have the eldest princess as the dean than someone else. Those old fellows wouldn't object. He originally wanted to ask for more details, but the hall suddenly became quiet. Seeing a figure walking out from the back of the hall, old General Shui immediately returned to his original position. Li Yi poked his head out from behind the pillar. When he saw that Emperor Jing was already sitting on the dragon chair, he quickly shrank back. The most important topic discussed in the imperial court today was still the flood control. The imperial court had sent several groups of officials to deal with the flood in the south, but they couldn't effectively deal with it. The focus of this morning's discussion was this matter. The officials were all eager to offer advice, but very few of them were able to put forward constructive suggestions. They either repeated the routine of the predecessors or said some nonsense that seemed reasonable but were actually all fake. Li Yi was a little annoyed listening to them from behind the pillar. Emperor Jing looked at the noisy imperial court below. His eyes swept around a few times, but he didn't see a certain figure. He frowned and said, "Where is Li Yi?" The pillar in the hall was very thick, just enough to cover his entire body. When Li Yi heard it for the second time, he realized that someone was calling him. He walked out from behind the pillar, bowed and said, "I'm here." Emperor Jing saw him hiding behind the pillar again and glared at him vaguely. He said, "The imperial court has sent 2 groups of officials to deal with the flood in the south, but they failed. In your opinion, how should we deal with the flood this time?" As soon as Emperor Jing said this, many people in the imperial court looked slightly gloomy. Regarding the flood control, all the civil and military officials in the imperial court expressed their opinions, but no one could enter Emperor Jing's eyes. Only County Marquis Li was pointed out by Emperor Jing even though he hid behind the pillar. It showed how much Emperor Jing trusted him. This was really not a good thing for some people in the imperial court. "Your Majesty, what I want to say has already been said by the officials." Li Yi said helplessly, "I really don't know how to deal with the flood." The power of nature was so terrible that even in the later generations, it was not something that could be resisted by human beings. No matter how many books he read and how much knowledge he did not think that he could be better than the professional flood control officials of the Imperial Water Surveillance. Moreover, limited by technology, the flood control methods of the later generations could not be realized in the present. His knowledge was not of much use as a reference. Moreover, he had to analyze the actual situation and conduct field investigations. It was better not to get involved in this muddy water. In a few months, Rui would give birth. He did not want to leave at this time. Before this, he had left for a long time. "Okay, you can leave." Emperor Jing waved his hand and realized that he had subconsciously regarded him as the last straw of hope. Dealing with the flood was not a matter of memorizing books or reciting poems. Even the officials of the Imperial Water Surveillance could not do it. What good method could he have? Some people in the hall sneered. It was true that County Marquis Li was good at using some strange tricks, but when it came to governing a country or things that required real ability, he would show his true colors. This time, Li Yi did not return to his original position. He had been called out by the old emperor once. It was not good to hide behind the pillar again. You should not have said that just now. Old General Shui slowly moved to his side and said in a low voice, even if you really don't understand, you can repeat it according to what the person in front of you said. Don't use such tricks in the future. I understand. Li didn't mind. If he didn't link it to the actual situation and just talked about it, the people in the imperial court wouldn't be a match for him even if they joined forces. However, this kind of thing couldn't be discussed on paper. One word from him could cause countless people to suffer. It was better not to speak. The matter of controlling the flood did not come to a conclusion in the end and could only be temporarily put aside. The imperial court once again sent more officials over. Li Yi estimated that today's morning court should be over soon. Should he go to the old monk Tan Yin or old Taoist Yuan first? This was a question worth thinking about. At this moment, Emperor Jing above said something and a eunuch walked out from behind him. It seemed that he was going to announce an imperial edict. Li Yi decided to go back to find out the situation first and then make a plan. He inadvertently looked up and found that Emperor Jing was looking at him. His heart thumped and he instantly had a very bad premonition. Chapter 777. The old emperor's gaze seemed to have a deeper meaning, and the ominous feeling in Li Yi's heart intensified. At that moment, he was in a trance, so he didn't hear clearly what the eunuch had said at the start. He seemed to have called out his name, or perhaps he had heard wrongly. In any case, the eunuch had said a lot, and Li Yi could only hear that he was praising someone. Something about a young hero, countless contributions to the country, and 1,000 years of good fortune, and a series of more flowery words, praising that person as rare in the world and hard to find in the heavens. Li finally relaxed. Although he was outstanding, he wasn't that outstanding. It seemed like the eunuch wasn't talking about him. As long as the person didn't find trouble with him, he could do whatever he wanted. To be conferred the title of Grand Minister of the Golden Purple Imperial Treasury, a great honor. Li Yi understood the last sentence. Grand Minister of the Golden Purple Imperial Treasury, and he wondered which big shot had retired. No wonder the old emperor was so generous with his praise. Grand Minister of the Golden Purple Imperial Treasury was a third-rank official. Although it was just a rank and title without any real power, it was an extremely high honor for an official in the imperial court. This kind of official arrangement was inherited from the previous dynasty. After an official retired, the imperial court wouldn't ignore them. Usually, they would arrange a suitable place for them, and at the same time, squeeze out their remaining value and give them a rank but no real power, such as an advisor to the nation. This was also a tradition in the Jing kingdom. Usually, it was given to retired officials. They could also participate in the imperial court, and their status was usually higher. However, this was only limited to the more respected officials. Ordinary officials didn't have this qualification. Before these officials retired, they were the prime minister and other pillars of the country. Even after they retired, the emperor would still attach great importance to their opinions. Therefore, although they didn't have any real power, they had a deep influence on the imperial court. Li Yi remembered hearing the words, young hero, just now, but he must have heard wrongly. He turned to look at old General Shui and asked, which official in the imperial court retired? After he finished speaking, he saw that old General Shui was looking straight at him with an expression of extreme shock. Not only old General Shui, but the surrounding officials also looked at him as though they were looking at a monster, their faces full of disbelief. What's wrong? Li opened his mouth and asked. That extremely bad premonition appeared again. What are you waiting for? Thank you. Old General Shui whispered and pushed Li Yi out. What are you thanking me for? After all, although the Marquis was only a disbanded official, he had directly participated in the affairs of the country and had an extremely important position in the court. It couldn't be held by a young man. These were all pleasant to hear. To be more serious, they directly pointed out that the emperor shouldn't be so fond of him. Since ancient times, those who were favored by the emperor were all sycophants. Li Yi retreated behind the pillar again to avoid being stained by their spittle. He showed an extremely depressed expression on his face. Naturally, he was depressed because the old emperor was looking for trouble. He didn't even bother to be the dean. How could he be a doctor? He planned to stay at home and be a full-time nanny to take care of the child after Rui gave birth. Naturally, the less trouble, the better. How could you hide such a big thing? Old General Shui came over and saw the expression on his face. Then he looked at a certain official who was still talking incessantly. He curled his lips and said, "Don't worry about those people. They can't do anything about the emperor's decision." Of course, Li Yi wasn't worried about this, but he couldn't explain it to him. At this time, many people around him had already congratulated him with cupped hands. If he didn't have a few friends in the court, he would be a failure. In fact, except for the Chui family and those firm supporters of the king of Shu, no one went up to advise him. "Alright, I have made up my mind. If you have any other opinions, we will discuss them later." Emperor Jing stood up from the dragon throne and waved his hand. Court dismissed. Li didn't even have the chance to refuse. He saw Emperor Jing stand up and leave. At this time, most people in the court had their eyes on him. Li Yi bid farewell to old General Shui and the rest before striding out of the hall. He didn't want to stay here and be looked at like a monkey. "Lord Li, please wait." Not long after he walked out of the hall, a voice came from behind. Li Yi turned his head and saw the master of the Wang family walking towards him quickly. At this moment, he naturally couldn't leave directly. The master of the Wang family walked forward and cupped his hands. He smiled and said, "Congratulations, Lord Li. Let's walk and talk." Seeing that many people had walked out of the hall, Li Yi pointed to the front and said. The master of the Wang family stopped him not only to congratulate him, but also to talk about the Wang family's scholarship. In the future, the Wang family would take out a sum of money every year to reward the outstanding students of the academy, covering all the future academies in the Jing Kingdom. In addition, he also expressed his willingness to set up the same scholarship for the School of Mathematics. Naturally, Li Yi wouldn't refuse. The Wang family wanted to establish a reputation among the scholars, which was what the old emperor wanted to see. Chapter 778. Time passed by half an hour. After the court was dismissed, Emperor Jing did not directly return to his bedroom. Instead, he habitually called the two prime ministers and several high-ranking officials in the court, and went all the way to the imperial garden. In the past, he would discuss with these people in the imperial garden about things that had not been decided in the court and finally made a decision. Apart from a few matters, he had never acted arbitrarily in the affairs of the state. When he walked out of the hall, he stopped and said to a eunuch behind him, "Go to the morning dew hall and invite Princess Royal here." Although Emingzu was only a woman, he did not know when he started to treat her as a girl who only loved martial arts. Some of her views on state affairs and political affairs often made his eyes light up, and even directly changed his thoughts and decisions. In the past 2 years, it was especially so. Prime Minister Qin, Prime Minister Shen, and several high-ranking officials naturally had no objection to this. They were not qualified to object. What Princess Royal had done in the past 2 years, even if all of them added up, was still shameful. Just like in the folk opera, women were not inferior to men. It was not an exaggeration to use this word to describe Princess Royal. In the imperial garden, Emperor Jing sat on a stone chair in the pavilion. Prime Minister Shen and Prime Minister Qin were old, so Emperor Jing specially allowed them to sit together. As for the other high-ranking officials, they could only stand. I confer the title of Marquis of Chang and Li Yi as Minister of Jin Ziguanglu. What do you all think? Just now in the hall, these people did not speak. In their position, unless the emperor's decision was extremely inappropriate, they would not take the initiative to speak up. Prime Minister Qin pondered for a moment and said, "Marquis Li Yi is a young hero and has made countless contributions to our Jing kingdom. However, Your Majesty has already given him a great favor by promoting him to a county marquis. I think that Marquis Li is still too young and does not understand state affairs and politics. He is not qualified to be a minister of Jinzi Guanglu. If your majesty insists on this, I am afraid that many officials in the court will be disappointed. Even he did not dare to deny Li Yi's achievements. Just the matter of heavenly punishment alone was enough to make him more meritorious than all the officials in the imperial court. Not to mention that he had turned the tide, defeated the envoy of the Qi kingdom, and founded the computing academy. Prime Minister Qin was the prime minister of a dynasty. He knew Li Yi's contributions to the Jing kingdom better than anyone else. His Majesty had conferred him the title of a county marquis because he had indeed made great contributions. This could not be denied by anyone. However, if he were to become the youngest Golden Ziguanglu minister in the history of the Jing kingdom, it would be too much. Those who had held this position in the past were all old officials with decades of political experience and high prestige. It was really not a position that a young boy who did not understand politics could take. Emperor Jing's eyes looked to the side, and several ministers also spoke one after another. Although they did not have a negative attitude towards this matter, they did not agree with it either. They did not lean towards Prime Minister Qin, nor did they have any enmity with County Marquis Li. They just felt that this matter was inappropriate from the bottom of their hearts. The reason was the same as what Prime Minister Qin had said. It was a very important official position for the imperial court, and it could not be given to a boy who did not understand state affairs. This could be seen from his speech in the hall just now. Prime Minister Shen, who had been silent, finally opened his mouth when Emperor Jing looked over. I think this matter, Your Majesty should think twice. This meant that no one agreed with him. Emperor Jing did not show any dissatisfaction on his face. Before this, he had already guessed the reaction of the officials. After all, Li was still too young. However, even if he really did not understand politics, as long as he was in the imperial court, he could solve the problem that all the officials could not solve. His meritorious service was far more than this, but he would not become an official with real power. Apart from this, he could not give the other party anything else. Seeing that Emingzu had been standing for a while, Emperor Jing waved his hand and no longer mentioned that matter. He said, "This matter will be put aside for the time being. As for the flood in the south," Prime Minister Qin bowed his head slightly and sighed in his heart. Putting it aside for the time being meant that it could not be changed. In the end, he still underestimated the position of County Marquis Li in His Majesty's heart. How could the King of Shu make such a strong enemy for no reason? As for the flood in the south, they also had some ideas in their hearts after listening to the comments of many officials in the imperial court. Emingzu recorded all their words. Not long after, a palace guard came in from outside. Changde stood outside the pavilion, stopped him and asked, "What's the matter?" The guard said, "County Marquis Li is outside and wants to see the first princess." Before Changde spoke, a voice came from behind. Emperor Jing raised his head, and a strange look appeared in his eyes. He said, "Let him in. Father has his reasons for conferring you the title of Honorable Minister Jinzi." "Don't talk nonsense." Li looked at the first princess, and his eyes were a little surprised.